All right. Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into some pretty heavy stuff today.
Yeah.
We've got a recent news story that we're going to unpack about a Florida Democratic Party official and LGBTQ activist
Yeah.
who was arrested on some serious charges. And we're also going to be taking a look at the online reactions to this case.
Right.
And our sources for this deep dive are a Fox News article and its comment section.
Okay.
And before we jump in, just want to be clear.
Yeah.
We're not here to take sides. We're not looking to get into political debates.
Right.
We're just here to look at the facts of the case and how people are responding to it.
I think that's really important to state right up front.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to get caught up in the emotion of these kinds of stories.
Right.
And I think what we're going to see in this case is how this one event becomes like a lens that people project all sorts of their own beliefs and biases through.
Yeah, it's like everyone's looking at the same picture, but seeing totally different things,
Exactly.
So to start, let's lay out the basics of the case itself.
Okay.
So we're talking about a guy named Matthew Inman, and he was holding two pretty prominent positions. He was the treasurer for the Orange County Democratic Party and the president of the Rainbow Democrats, which is an LGBTQ advocacy group.
Right. And the charges against him are pretty disturbing.
Yeah.
We're talking about transportation of child sexual abuse material.
Right.
And the article goes into some detail about how he allegedly received and kept videos depicting the sexual abuse of children. And he's also accused of having online conversations with an undercover officer who was posing as a father.
Oh, gosh.
Where he expressed interest in meeting and assaulting a 9-year-old.
Oh, my gosh.
So really, really serious accusations.
Yeah, it gets even worse. The article says that when the FBI showed up with a search warrant, he allegedly tried to delete videos from his phone.
Oh, wow.
And hide from officers in his attic.
Oh, my goodness.
So, it paints a pretty damning picture.
Yeah. And if these allegations are true, obviously, his attempts to cover up the evidence certainly don't help his case.
Right.
So, naturally, both the Rainbow Democrats and the Orange County Democrats had to respond to this situation.
Yeah, they had to. And they did. And they did pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Both organizations issued statements, I think, pretty soon after the news broke.
Mm-hmm.
The Rainbow Democrats expressed shock and offered condolences to any potential victims.
Yeah.
They also said that they had suspended Inman immediately and would be officially removing him from the organization at their next meeting.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
What I noticed in their statement is that they also emphasized their commitment to continuing their work, in the community. It seems like they're trying to distance themselves from his alleged actions.
Right.
But also reassuring everyone that their core mission and their values as an organization remain intact.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
The Orange County Democrats, they kind of took a similar approach. They strongly condemned child sexual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
They suspended Inman and really made it clear that they're all about accountability.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, they even went so far as to elect a new treasurer right away.
It was a very decisive move, by acting quickly and publicly denouncing Inman. It seems like they were aiming to preserve their own credibility and demonstrate that they were taking this very seriously.
Right. Okay, so now here's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Let's dive into the comment section of this Fox News article. Yeah. And, once again, we're not endorsing any specific viewpoint here. We're just observing the reactions.
Right. I think of this as like a little glimpse into the collective mind of the internet.
Yes.
We see a whole spectrum of opinions ranging from raw emotion to very calculated political maneuvering.
Yeah.
And it really exposes how people process this kind of complex and often disturbing information through the filter of their own beliefs.
Yeah, and it's that filtering process that we really want to kind of unpack here.
Right.
So some of the comments are, pretty straightforward, just expressing disgust and condemnation of Inman's alleged actions, which is, understandable, given the severity of the accusations. But then we start to see comments that try to connect this isolated incident to bigger political narratives.
Right, and that's where things start to get a little bit tricky.
Yeah.
You know, you see comments criticizing the entire LGBTQ community or the Democratic Party based solely on this one case.
Right.
And it's a classic example of how a single event can be used to reinforce these existing prejudices and generalizations.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to get into next.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like some people see this and they're like, oh, see, this is what those people are like?
Right, and that's the danger of confirmation bias, right?
Okay.
We tend to latch onto information that confirms what we already believe, even if it means ignoring the bigger picture.
Right.
Or the nuances of a particular case.
Yeah, and these days, you know, with the internet and social media algorithms that are kind of constantly feeding us content that aligns with our views, it's easier than ever to get trapped in those echo chambers.
Absolutely.
So how do we, in a world that's just overflowing with information, some of it deliberately misleading, how do we even begin to form informed opinions without falling prey to these biases?
It's tough.
Yeah, it feels like a minefield out there.
It definitely takes effort and a willingness to think critically. You know, I think we need to be skeptical of information, especially when it's coming from sources that might have an agenda, you know. Always ask yourself, who's presenting this information and what's their motivation?
It's like becoming your own fact checker.
Exactly. Cross-reference, look for evidence, consider different perspectives. You know, it's easy to get swept up in the outrage at the moment. But taking a step back and actually engaging those critical thinking skills is so crucial.
All right, so let's dissect some specific comments from this article and see these biases in action. Okay. So one person wrote, they say, don't judge a book by its cover, but looking at his mugshot goes against that.
Oh.
You can definitely see this one has problems.
Wow. That's a perfect example of how quickly we make judgments based on appearances, right? Well, we all do it to some extent, you know, relying solely on visual cues to determine someone's character or guilt is incredibly unreliable. And it's the kind of thinking that can lead to prejudice and unfair assumptions.
Okay, here's another one. It wasn't too long ago that 145 Democrats voted against a bill that would protect children from sexual exploitation. The Dems stated that it would unfairly target the LGBTQ+ community for criminal actions. Let that sink in for a minute.
So here we see an attempt to manipulate a complex issue to fit a predetermined narrative. Right? It oversimplifies the debate around the bill and implies this direct link between opposing that bill and condoning child sexual abuse, which is a classic case of using a single event to paint an entire group in a negative light.
Okay, and it gets even more blatant. Validating the stereotype they all rail against. And his behavior falls right in line with the Democrat Party agenda.
So those are prime examples of overgeneralization, right? It's taking the actions of one individual and extrapolating that to an entire group of people, which perpetuates harmful stereotypes and shuts down any possibility of nuanced discussion.
Okay, this one's interesting. Has to be a mistake. He's part of a peaceful, loving, giving community that only wants men to dress up like women and read to children.
Oh, boy. Sarcasm and irony can be so tricky online, right? Without those clear cues, you know, tone of voice, facial expressions. It's easy for humor to be misinterpreted and fuel further misunderstanding, especially on sensitive topics like this. It's a good reminder to be mindful of how our words can be perceived in the online world.
All right. And then, of course, we have the more kind of aggressive inflammatory comments, things like, have you noticed Democrats are always trying to lower the age of consent for everything? Now you know why. And 0 people surprised. Normalized demo-communist behavior.
Right. So those are textbook examples of using inflammatory language and unsubstantiated claims to demonize opponents and rile people up, you know. This type of rhetoric doesn't contribute to any meaningful dialogue. It simply aims to create division and reinforce that existing animosity.
Yeah, and what strikes me is how many of these comments reveal not just confirmation bias, but other cognitive biases too.
Oh, yeah.
Like availability bias, where people overestimate the likelihood of something happening based on how easily they can recall examples. It's like this case is feeding into all sorts of pre-existing anxieties and beliefs about certain groups of people.
Right. And the more we understand these biases, the better equipped we are to recognize them in ourselves and in others.
Right.
It's about cultivating that awareness and resisting that urge to jump to conclusions based on limited information or emotional reactions.
Okay, so let's move on to,
Right.
it feels like this whole case has become like a Rorschach test for people's political and social views.
That's a great analogy. I mean, it really does expose
Yeah.
how deeply entrenched these divisions are. And instead of, finding some kind of common ground in the face of something as universally abhorrent as child abuse, people retreat to their corners and use it as ammunition against the other side.
Right.
It's deeply concerning.
It makes you wonder if facts even matter anymore when people are so quick to just interpret them in a way that confirms what they already believe.
Right. It's like we're living in these separate realities.
It is.
And I think it's a symptom of the information age where everyone has access to this fire hose of content that's tailored to their specific worldview. The algorithms that drive our online experiences are designed to keep us engaged.
Right.
And often that means feeding us more of what we already agree with. So it creates these echo chambers where dissenting opinions are rarely even encountered.
Right.
And it becomes harder and harder to bridge that gap between different perspectives.
So how do we break out of those echo chambers? How do we have productive conversations about sensitive topics when it feels like we're all speaking different languages?
It starts with a willingness to listen, to really listen to perspectives that challenge our own.
Really?
It means approaching these conversations with curiosity rather than judgment, seeking to understand the other person's point of view, even if we disagree with it.
Yeah.
And it requires a certain level of humility, acknowledging that we might be wrong, that our perspective might be limited.
Yeah, those are all great aspirations. But in practice, it's so hard to resist that knee-jerk reaction to just argue or shut down.
Yeah.
When someone says something that contradicts, like, our deeply held beliefs.
Absolutely. And, our brains are wired to seek out patterns and confirm our existing beliefs, but just recognizing that this tendency exists is the first step towards overcoming it. And remember, it's not about abandoning our values or pretending to agree with things that we find reprehensible. It's about engaging in respectful dialogue, even when it's difficult.
Yeah. Thinking about all the comments that we've discussed, it seems like a lot of them stem from fear.
Fear is powerful.
Yeah, fear of the unknown, fear of the other, fear of having your worldview challenged, and fear is a powerful motivator.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, fear is often exploited by those seeking to sow division and discord.
Right.
That's why it's so important to be critical of the information we consume and be aware of the tactics being used to manipulate our emotions.
So where does this leave us, listener? I think the key takeaway here is the importance of being an active participant in shaping your own understanding of the world. Don't passively absorb information, especially from sources with clear biases.
Right.
Be skeptical, dig deeper, seek out diverse perspectives.
And remember, forming informed opinions isn't a passive activity. It takes effort. It takes critical thinking.
Right.
And a willingness to challenge our own assumptions.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing process, and there's always more to learn.
Yeah.
But it's a worthwhile endeavor because it's the foundation of a healthy, functioning society.
Well, this deep dive has been a whirlwind, taking us from the shocking details of this case to a much broader reflection on how we process information and how we engage with each other in this digital age. It's heavy stuff, but I think it's essential to grapple with these complexities if we want to navigate the world in a thoughtful and responsible way.
Couldn't agree more. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a question to ponder.
Okay.
How can we, as individuals and as a community, foster a culture of respectful dialogue and critical thinking, especially when confronted with these sensitive and emotionally charged topics? It's a challenge.
It is.
But I believe it's a challenge worth taking on.
A lot to think about there. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
And we'll see you next time as we continue to explore this world of information and ideas.
Yeah.